Hi there, folks, and welcome to our first Ohio Learns 360 family webinar of the school year. Ohio Learns 360 is generously funded by the Ohio Department of Education. My name is Connor Morris, and I'm IdeaStream Public Media's education reporter. I'm here today with child development expert, parent educator, and author, Deborah Farmer Chris. Her bylines include CNN, PBS Kids, NPR's Mindshift, and more. She spent 20 plus years as a K through 12 teacher and administrator and has presented to thousands of educators and parents around the US. Great to have you here, Deborah. How are you doing?
I'm great. Thanks so much for having me.
Of course, of course. So today we're going to be chatting with Deborah about how we can help children navigate life changes. Life's many transitions and changes are difficult to navigate for adults. Just imagine how hard that is for children who are experiencing those for the first time. Whether it's moving to a new home, welcoming a new sibling, coping with divorce, children can feel overwhelmed and uncertain about how to handle these things. We're glad to have folks join us today as we delve into research based strategies and real life experiences to help you support children through various life transitions. So, Deborah, to start with here, we mentioned some common transitions at the top here, but are there others that caregivers need to keep in mind? Are there some that maybe some transitions that we might not think about as adults whose childhood is kind of in the rearview mirror now?
One thing to recognize about childhood is that it is basically one big transition. I mean, you think about an infant, and then you think about a 2-year-old who's walking and talking, and then suddenly they're 4 and they have this explosion of cognition. And then imagine them being 12 and suddenly their body's changing and their brain's going through a second developmental brain spurt. So you have these things that we think about, like changes, a new school year starting, a best friend moving away. But then sometimes their body's changing on them, their brains are changing on them, friend groups are changing constantly. And we might just kind of say, oh, we've been through it, it's hard to remember. But for kids, it can be scary and overwhelming. And all change, even good change, even change that's anticipated and wanted, is inherently stressful. That's one thing any psychologist will tell you. They can call that what's called eustress. So that's positive stress. Like, I'm so excited that I got into the gymnastics team I really wanted, but it's a change in routine, it's a change in expectations, and that's going to create a stressful environment that kids are going to need help with. So your kid will have a meltdown, and your instinct might be, why aren't they more grateful? They wanted this. But that doesn't mean that they have integrated it into kind of their understanding of themselves yet.
That makes a lot of sense, absolutely. And what are some of those signs? You mentioned that just very briefly there. What are some signs that a child is, in fact, struggling with a transition that caregivers should keep in mind?
Yeah. So one thing to remember is that for kids, and this is true for adolescents too, but especially for young kids, behavior is communication. So we might expect them to talk to us or want them to, right? To say, I'm feeling really unsettled about the fact that my best friend's moving away in 2 weeks. But what you might see are changes in typical behaviors. And so it may be they're having trouble sleeping. It may be that your 4-year-old is regressing with potty training. It may be that something that brought them joy before isn't bringing them joy right now. It may be that they're suddenly the stresses with their younger sibling that they could handle before is suddenly just they're exploding. And all of that is a sign that their self-regulation skills are not as there as you may have seen them a few weeks ago. And that's a sign that there's something inside that's dysregulated.
Hmm, interesting stuff. And I guess the kind of opposite of that, I mean, what are some signs that a child is, in fact, transitioning well?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things to remember is that kids often do transition really well, even if there's initial speed bumps. And so what you start to see is some evening out of that, right? So your kindergartner for the first 4 weeks comes home exhausted and cranky. That is so normal, by the way, because they're holding in at school and they're falling apart afterwards. But suddenly it's October and they're more cheerful after school and they're not as cranky at bedtime. And you see that they've kind of worked through that kind of emotional growth spurt that comes with dealing with some changes. And also when they can start to talk about maybe even what happened in the past, like, oh, wow, it was really tough when, that's a sign once they actually can talk to you about it that they're thinking about it at a different level. Which is why sometimes, even as parents, it's great to kind of circle back and say, wow, you've really seemed to be enjoying your new baseball team. First couple of weeks were a little bit hard, weren't they? And that gives that opening to reflect on how they've grown during that time, because there'll be a time later where they're also going through that, and you can remind them, remember how tough the first 2 weeks were of baseball season 2 years ago? Basketball season's tough now too, but I know you can do it because you've done it before.
Kind of building up that confidence then.
Mm.
That makes sense. So I myself do not have any children, but I do remember when I was the summer in between middle school and high school, my parents moved to a new town and new high school. So high school was new for me, and then also,
That's a double whammy.
in a new town as well. So I was struggling with that for sure when I was younger. I'm curious about what parents could do to help children when they are kind of preparing for a transition. So in the weeks or months leading up to that, if they're able to, if they have the time to.
Yeah, a lot of transitions, luckily, are predictable. There are those things that happen that aren't. But for change is coming, like a new school year starting or a move, the more you can talk about it in advance, and not just on a global level of, wow, you're going to be a kindergartner, but on a really practical level, like, this is how you're going to get to school. This is the name of your teacher. This is how the lunch line works, or I'm going to be packing you a lunch. Because Fred Rogers, who's really my guru, one of his great quotes is that when children know ahead of time what's going to happen, they can prepare themselves for what's coming. They can get used to their feelings about it. And I think sometimes as adults, we imagine one thing, and what the kids are actually worried about is something else. And when you kind of open up that space, for example, um, we moved when my oldest was starting first grade across the country. And I assumed that the big worry would be making friends. But as we talked about it over the summer and talked about what to expect and went on to tour of the school, what she was most concerned about was where she was going to sit on the bus and how the lunch line worked. Because her previous school, they just ate lunch in their classrooms, not a big cafeteria. And once we could get that out, that was a worry. And part of that happened because we were reading books about the first day of school, then I could actually address the things that were causing her concern. And that takes time. And that's where that practical piece, if there's, for example, a divorce of, so what's it going to look like on a practical level? Like, where, is my favorite toys going to go back and forth with me? Am I going to get double of them? You might think that they're worried about, do their parents love them, but they might just be worried about what's going to happen to their favorite blanket, and will they have it at both houses? And so that's where talking a lot and watching and listening and being really curious about our kids' experiences can help us.
That makes sense for sure. And I suppose, again, like on the opposite side of that, what is there any helpful advice for parents where it's something that's so sudden and they really couldn't plan for it? Awful to say, but mayhaps a death in the family, like they see grandma every week and now they're not going to be able to. Any advice on as far as that goes?
Yeah, and so often the sudden ones are the hardest because we're dealing with our own emotions, right?
Yeah.
So, when my father-in-law passes away and I'm dealing with emotions, my husband is, but then our kids are too. And so at those moments, a couple things to remember is that all emotions that are being expressed are normal. There's no one way to grieve or to react to something. And so, for example, children often do what we call grief dosing. Like, let's say it is a grief transition, where they might be all upset and then go play and be fine and then be upset again. And so, sometimes I hear somebody say, oh, the kid's doing fine because they were laughing and playing after the memorial service. Well, they're developmentally working things out at their own pace. And so it might be easy to kind of minimize, but we got to keep watching. And when you're dealing with a sudden thing that is stressful on you too, as much as you can get your village together to help, right? To get the aunt or the uncle, to get the neighbor who's close to your kids, to get your kids' best friends, to take them away for a day, to do something fun, but to pull that village together, It's great because people want to help. It's great for your kids to see people helping, and it's great for you to realize that that support network is there. And often we forget to activate it during stressful times.
Makes a lot of sense. Thank you. What if we talked about this a little bit earlier, but what if your caregiver's children appear to be doing well with a transition until the moment that those emotions really do start bubbling up? Any advice on how to kind of handle that in a healthy manner?
Just don't overreact. And I know that's hard. It's hard for us to see our kids in distress. But one of the things to recognize is that kids being upset about things that are upsetting is really normal. In fact, happy, like a well-adjusted child is not one who's happy all the time.
Mm.
So, like, let's say that their teacher does leave mid-year, a beloved teacher, and they're upset and they're sad and they don't want to go to school. That's actually a very proportionate response to a loss. And if they were simply like, whatever, I don't really care, that might be easier for us, but the actual deeper emotion is a sign of emotional health, not a sign necessarily of something wrong. So I think that's important to recognize is just because your kid is sad or angry, that doesn't mean that they're not mentally healthy. In fact, sometimes that means they are exactly having the proportionate responses that they should be having.
Mm.
So I think remembering that. Also, it's going to come out when it comes out, right? So some kids are brooders, they bottle it up, and then they suddenly have an explosion on a weekend. Other kids will talk their way all the way through it. Some kids don't want to talk about it. Some kids want to narrate their whole life. And you got to recognize, like, you're dealing with a kid in front of you, and their timetable may not be yours. And so providing time for them to talk and being that solid person in their life, like, I discover with my kids when they're upset, I almost always hear about it after bedtime.
Hmm.
That's not always convenient. But
Yeah.
that seems to be the time of day where they call me back in and suddenly they want to talk about what happened at recess.
No.
And
Huh.
I get that, right? Or like it's a walk when it's kind of darker outside with the dog, and suddenly I hear about things.
Mhm.
So, you know, you may say, how was school? They'll say, fine, everything looks great. And then you're surprised that you're suddenly hearing at 10 o'clock at night about an episode on the playground. But that's okay. Take it when you get it. And, you want to keep those lines of communication open no matter what. And, one of the best things about parenting is that we know that our calm presence is one of the very best things for our kids. They're looking to us to see how upset to be. So if they tell us about something that happened on the playground and we just go to level 10 alert, they're thinking, oh my gosh, that really was bad. I really should be really upset. But if we can pause and say, yeah, that's tough. I can see why you're hurt. Let's talk about how to handle this. Then they say, oh, I'm heard and this is solvable. And so our instant emotions of, I've got to solve this for you, somebody said something mean to you, that can actually be more alarming to your child
Mhm.
than simply acknowledging that, yeah, your feelings got hurt and let's maybe do some troubleshooting together.
Interesting. That makes a lot of sense. One thing that I'm thinking about here too, as well as we move through this, is a lot of this is about communication, and I can only imagine this must be extra challenging for parents with children with disabilities, with autism, for example, where they might have more of a challenge with communicating. Any advice there in terms of transitions and communicating with them in a way that kind of meets them where they are?
Yeah, you know, parents are, we're given so many challenges, and some we're ready for, and some we're not. One thing that is really helpful for all kids, those who are neurodivergent, those who are neurotypical, is when we can be patient and when we can help them, especially younger ones, really have a sense of routine. That is huge for emotional regulation. So, this is true for your neurotypical neurodivergent, say 4-year-old, right? When routine is disrupted, that is a change that is stressful. And for kids who are really reliant on routine, and many autistic kids, routine absolutely is part of the fabric of how they can operate in a way that makes sense. When that is disrupted, you know, that's when the real flare-ups can happen, and the meltdowns. And so, as much as we can be thinking about how do we have the visual routine, the checklists, and
Hmm.
how that, obviously, routines are going to be disrupted sometimes. But on a day-to-day basis, being able to have that sense of predictability is really, it helps kids feel safe. And I'll give you an example of this. I was substituting in kindergarten years ago, early beginning of my career, and I wasn't nervous about the day. And I'd put the schedule on the board. The kids are coming in and hanging up their stuff, and two kids walked to the schedule and burst into tears. And I couldn't figure it out. And just really and I couldn't get them to talk. And finally, one of them pointed and said, "We don't have lunch today," because I forgot to put lunch on the daily schedule.
Oh.
And they just assumed that the substitute was going to withhold lunch and they would be hungry.
Oh.
And I thought, oh, right? Like that is a really stressful disruption of routine. So
Sure.
we put lunch back on and they could calm themselves back down.
Oh.
And I think about how we have to be paying attention and watching, um, and being mindful that these small things, like when we put ourselves in our kids' shoes, that feels like a really big thing. Like the big boss is taking away lunch. That's a really, really scary thing to be happening.
Sure, that's a great example. And obviously, lots of children are going to be in new classrooms starting soon, in August and beyond here, depending on their school year schedule. Um, any advice for parents in terms of preparing them for a new school specifically or a new classroom? Maybe it's they're getting into kindergarten for the first time or first grade, kindergarten into first grade. Any advice for parents there to help their kids prepare?
Oh, yeah, it's just such an exciting time. And, a few things. Number one, as much as you can talk about it in advance in exciting ways, the new things you're going to be learning, the math that you learn, the books that you read, the stories you're going to write, the pictures you're going to draw. I'm so excited to see all the ways you're going to learn and grow this year. That was a routine I did with my kids for years before, on the day before the first day of school. Just start talking about all the things we were looking forward to that year. Um, if possible, if there's a chance to get into the school or classroom before the year starts, if that is offered, take it,
Oh,
because it feels so good to go and see, this is where I'm going to sit. This is where my cubby is, right? This is where the bathroom is down the hall. Those little things that may be weighing on their mind that would make the first day harder when they get in and just are trying to get oriented. Make sure they know the teacher's name, make sure that they have a sense of like the agenda of the day. First, you're going to go to school if they're younger, then you're going to, do this and then recess. And you can usually find old schedules on the web or email the teacher. But one really important piece here too, um, is that it's fine to email the teacher before the school year starts and tell them something about your kid. When I was a teacher for years and years and years, I would often email in advance and say, if there's anything you want to tell me about your kid, what they love to do, what works for them when they're upset, I'm all ears. Uh, but you can do that too. You can say, I'm so excited my child's coming, because it's nice when the first communication, it's a partnership, and you want to build that partnership early. So, if you have a kid who may be nervous about, how to ask to use the bathroom, it's okay to give the teacher that heads up and
mhm.
say, and that helps me as a brand new teacher with 23 new kids in the room be mindful of that and have that on my radar screen. And so start that partnership, start it early. That's a great thing for your kid and for you and the teacher.
Makes a lot of sense, and that transitions well to my next question. Know that there are teachers watching this. Anything that they can take away from this in terms of helping those children who are in a new classroom experience, or maybe they've moved from a different district, or again, maybe they are in that transition from kindergarten to first grade, or even from, as we mentioned earlier, from middle school into high school.
Yeah. I think so many teachers are just such pros at helping kids, do this transition. But I remember when I was brand new to this, right? Or had to switch to a different grade, that moment of just empathy where I had to stop and say, I would start classes, even in high school sometimes, by saying, I taught high school briefly, raise your hand if you had trouble sleeping last night. And I would put my hand up because I say, I'm
Mm,
always nervous before the first day of school. And that was such just a way to recognize that before jumping into a syllabus, before jumping into to-do lists or routines, let's just acknowledge the feelings in the room. And
mm,
let's acknowledge that we are probably excited and nervous, maybe at the same time. We may have a lot of hopes, we may have some fears. And so, one of those, picking a really good first day read aloud, a chance to kind of write a letter to themselves that they read on the last day of school so they can see kind of all the ways they've grown later. Things that allow the emotional connection early on just to help that the emotions settle and then they know you're on their team. I think is a always works because it's kids like to know that their teacher's human and their teacher cares about them. We do, but we have to be really intentional about it sometimes, especially when kids are nervous.
sure. Looking back on your experiences as an educator, have you ever noticed these children struggling with transitions? Have you ever noticed that come into play in the classroom or outside? And what does that look like? Any examples would be great to hear.
Yeah, always. It can look like, and when you think about the kind of the stress responses that we know about as adults, like the fight, the flight, and the freeze. I had a child who at music class in fourth grade crawled under the piano. That was a flight and just didn't want to leave, was so nervous and just hugged and that coaxing out. You'll have some that maybe get combative, right? Of you put down something, a math diagnostic test, and they're nervous. And so what you hear is them bothering the person next to them. But what really is happening is that they are unsure about themselves.
Mm,
Or you might see the kid, you ask them to write something and suddenly they just freeze. They can't write it. Nothing's coming out. They just can't access their prefrontal cortex because what happens, and this is a visual I use with kids a lot, is when you're really stressed out about something, your brain, especially the part of your brain that can help you regulate your emotions, kind of looks like this.
mm,
If you can stop and you can take some deep breaths, then the glitter starts to settle. And once the glitter settles, we can think clearly again. And so this is a glitter jar. It's very easy to make with glue and water and glitter, as you can see it kind of going down. Um, but this is a good visual to say, yes, I know you know how to write this piece, but you might be a little nervous right now. And that's okay. Why don't we take some deep breaths, go get a drink of water and come back and try again. And so, one of the things to remember is that for kids who have a limited emotional vocabulary sometimes, that dysregulation often comes out as anger, but that doesn't mean they're angry. And so if you think of it like a tip of an iceberg, right? That anger may be there, or I'm just so mad, but underneath is confusion, loneliness, stress. Who am I going to sit with at lunch? I'm hungry, I'm hangry, whatever that may be, but it's coming out as, we do this as adults, right? We snap at our partner, and it's not because they did anything, it's because we're stressed about, the insurance company who called us. Kids have less experience than we do. And so if we are simply responding to the anger that comes out and say, don't say that to me, stop being disrespectful, versus pausing and getting curious to say, my kid doesn't always react this way. Maybe there's something else going on here. And the number of times where I would pull a kid aside in my classroom, and once we talked about it, I realized what was under the surface, right? And there was once when I was actually an assistant principal, and there was this kid in middle school who was sent to me at roughly the same time every day for misbehaving, and it was a rotating schedule, and it was always about 10:30. And finally, one day, I was just trying to put it together. And I said, "Hey, what'd you have for breakfast this morning?" And he said, "I didn't have breakfast." And I said, "Do you normally not eat breakfast?" He's like, "Yeah, my mom has to leave for work at like 5, so I don't really eat breakfast." So I gave him a banana and sent him back to class. And then for a while, basically, if he came in, I give him some food, and then we figured out, as a team, like how to make sure he got some breakfast first thing. And lo and behold, he stopped being sent to my office as much
Mm,
because what it really was dysregulation because of hunger.
mm.
And so those are the types of things, if as parents and teachers we can get really curious and try to say, okay, no kid wants to be out of control. So if they are, there's something else going on. Like no kid's going to say to you, "That felt great. I'm so glad that I threw a tantrum in the middle of library class." Like,
Sure.
no, they don't want that. So if it's happening, they really do want our help in trying to figure out what to do.
Makes sense. One of the biggest transitions that we've talked about as a society as a whole in the last 3 years has been online learning.
Yeah.
So going from in person to online and then back to in person again. For many parents and children, that was the reality, you know. And I would say, I mean, to this day, of course, that's still a reality because parents are still figuring out what the best mode of education is for their children, too. Any advice for transitioning between online learning to in person or from in person to online for caregivers or for anybody that might be working with those children?
Yeah, we opened up Pandora's box with that, didn't we? And I think our challenge is going to be how do we take the best and let go. I don't think any of us want to ever be fully online again. The social emotional learning really suffered during that time. What I hear from a lot of principals right now is that the sixth graders are coming in with the social skills of fourth graders, and the fourth graders are coming in with social skills of second graders, and trickle down, because they so much of this great learning happens when kids are figuring out on the playground, right? They're playing, they're have a conflict, they work it out, and that's hard to do online, right? And in fact, it's actually those conflicts that I remember when my kids went back to school and there was the first recess drama, and I was so excited. I was like, "Great, you have to figure this out." Another mom was like, "Oh no, drama." And I was like, "No, this is really good. They haven't
Mm,
had a chance to do this. They have to figure out how to, play together and make these rules together and get along and make up and all of that stuff." But at the same time, there were definitely positive aspects to online learning. One of my kids is still doing a writing workshop in New York City, which is many, many miles away from our house. That there's no option nearby for that, but we found that during the pandemic and we kept it because it's
oh,
working. And so I think one thing to remember is that technology isn't evil, and but neither is it the panacea for kids. Kids need to be interacting with other kids. They need to be outside. They need to be moving their bodies. And so, trying to find that healthy balance is a struggle for all of us. But sometimes I try to think about rather than what are they, are they just consuming online, like just watching YouTube or TikTok, or are they creating,
mm,
right? So sometimes I'll go down and say, "Hey, I thought you were supposed to be off screens." And my kid will say, "Oh, but I'm writing a story, or I'm doing some coding, or I'm doing blank." And I'll say, "Oh, no, that's great. You're
oh,
creating." But, if it's just I'm still watching this Minecraft YouTube video, I'll say, "All right, time to turn that off and go build Legos." So,
yeah.
that's a balance as parents. Like all screen time's not created equal. And I think sometimes we're scared, like it's just should be is it just 1 hour or 2 hours or blank hours, then we feel guilty. But it's
Mm.
really about is our kid doing things that spark their interest and joy, or are they just looking like zombies when they're on it?
Sure, that makes sense. And you were talking about your children there. Would you mind terribly sharing, mayhaps some times when there were transitions for your children and how you kind of approached it?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think that so we had this major move. So I'll go back to those kids who were entering kind of kindergarten. I took my youngest, who's actually entering pre-K,
Okay.
and we went to go visit his school early because I knew he would need that. And I remember him watching all the kids on the yard in the play yard, and he turned to me at 4 and he said, "I don't want those friends. I want my old friends," which was
Oh,
right. Like it breaks my heart, but it was so great that he said it out loud. And so I told that to the director, right? I said, he's struggling. I was honest. And I said, he's really missing his friends. We've been having a lot of meltdowns, a little bit of regression with sleep. These are all normal things with transitions. And so, the director was such a rock star because, she really was mindful that he wasn't just starting a new program like you in high school. He was starting a whole new world in a whole new part of the country. And I think that if I hadn't reached out to kind of create that village, if I just sent him to school and never sent that email, so the first day she sent me a nice note back saying, with a picture saying, he's playing so well with other kids, so it eases my mom's heart over here. But it helped create this the beginnings of a village, which, I really needed to have at that point as I was new to the area too.
That makes a lot of sense for sure. And just on that topic, just if we could go just a little bit further, any tips for parents who have moved? That's one of the more common transitions, I'm assuming, to help their kids, especially if they're younger, find more friends.
Yeah. This is I love this because if you go to a new town and there's like a parents group or moms group on Facebook, often the ones in our town, there'll be people saying, I just moved here and I have a 2-year-old. Does anybody want to do a park play date? Because the great thing about really young kids is that when you go to a park, anybody's their friend. And then they say, I made a new best friend. And you say, what's their name? And they say, I don't know. And that's fine
Yeah.
because it's just about the practice. And so
Mm.
finding the park, asking around of where do you go to just let the kids play. But I very purposefully for my older one when we moved, who was entering first grade, signed up for Girl Scouts because I thought that's a smaller group, right? So I'm thinking, how do I make big a little bit smaller? And so if you have a kid who really loves sports, maybe look for a local team or a local club or something that can take the big and make it just a little bit smaller, can be really helpful for kids.
That makes a lot of sense for sure. So, yeah, those kind of clubs and extracurriculars, getting them
Yeah,
involved with them could be a good way to build that support.
yeah,
Great. Makes a lot of sense. And then on the topic of other things that parents can do to help out, let's talk books, resources, anything that either parents can have children read that will help them as they're getting ready for a transition or going through a transition, or I guess any like resources for parents to read, from that more kind of adult perspective of like to help them figure that out, kind of.
yeah. So I'm a really big fan for young ones of feelings books because
Okay.
there's just such great research that when kids develop their emotional vocabulary, when they can say not just I'm mad, but I'm worried or I'm nervous or I'm annoyed, that kind of level of specificity can really help them manage their emotions. And so Shameless Pitch is one that I wrote called You Have Feelings All the Time, which includes a discussion of the first day of school. But some of my other favorites includes like Todd Parr's The Feelings book or Wemberly Worried by Kevin Henkes or The Kissing Hand about the child who's nervous about the first day. But King of Kindergarten is another brand new one that's wonderful. But if you go to the library, and children's librarians are really one of like God's gifts to the earth. And you say, "We're going through a divorce. My mother is ill. We're starting a new school. We're having a new baby is joining the family. Can you help me find a couple of good picture books?" They can help you find a couple of good picture books, and so that's just a great resource. I also often say that there's a Daniel Tiger episode for everything. Um, and there truly is literally like when my second child was being born, it was when Margaret, Daniel's little sister was born, and I was like, this is perfect, right? So there was transition to a new baby, new friends coming, loss. It's all in there, stage fright. So that can be super helpful as well. And for adults, depending on the age, couple of my favorite books, I have them all over here, but if you have older kids,
Yeah.
Lisa D'Amour is a national treasure. Actually lives in Ohio.
Oh,
She's a
great.
child psychologist, and her most recent book is called The Emotional Life of Teens. And honestly, pick it up when your kid is 10 to prepare you for the journey. But that came out recently, and it's just a remarkable book to help you understand the transitions that come with being an adolescent and just the strong emotions and the things they're dealing with so that we can be supportive and not reactive to our teens when they slam the door and do other things that, you know, trigger our own strong emotions.
Sure. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Just a very brief follow-up. Is there any like apps or anything digital also that might be good for parents or for children as far as this goes in terms of transitions?
You know, the Daniel Tiger outs for the really young ones, I really like. And
Okay.
so, there's a Tiger Parents app that has all the strategy songs. And honestly, the strategy songs, um, I don't know how I would have potty trained, and like my whole cohort, because like my kids were born, and all my friends' kids, like we're the Daniel Tiger generation. But it was, we're all singing, and you need to go potty, stop, and go right away, and try new foods; they might taste good. And it's amazing how just these kind of simple messages. What do I say right now? Where we get like we're activated, and we need a strategy. Like those strategy songs are really for parents.
Mm,
Yes, they're for kids too, but they're for us and for parents and caregivers. And so I think those can be really good ones, just to be using as we are helping our younger kids.
yeah, that makes sense for sure. And I'd asked earlier about what teachers could be doing to help, kids in the situation. But is there anything that caregivers and parents can be doing to help the teachers out?
I th- Teachers have been such rock stars these last few years through very difficult times, and a little appreciation goes a long way.
Okay. Yeah.
And so I think that, you know, if the teacher has to call you something that's not easy, remembering that you're on the same page and that this is the team to help your kid, and then if your child has a great day, that quick little text or email that says so. We often as teachers, like, we hear when something's going wrong, but we don't always hear when the things are going right. And so I think that those quick emails can really feed a teacher, and it also is just that reminder that I think of it as, this is all like your child's success management team, and this is all the caregivers in their life, right? It's you, it's aunts and uncles, it's neighbors, and it's definitely the teachers who are seeing them many, many hours a day.
Mm, mhm. Makes sense for sure. And I probably should have asked you this earlier, actually, but I'm curious, what is at stake here if we are not adequately supporting our children through these transitions? Is there a risk of negative behaviors developing? I'm just curious about that.
Yeah, I mean, life is made up of change, and if we don't learn positive coping skills for handling it, then we're going to struggle at every transition. And so, part of ways to think about it is not to our job is not to make the transition completely painless for our children. Our job is to support them through it, right? We can't kind of stop it from happening, but we can be there to remind them of their strength, to show our confidence in them, to help them troubleshoot, to teach them strategies from deep breathing to, the good night's sleep, the healthy habits, so that when they're dealing with transitions without us later, when they're dealing with the unexpected, that they have built up their kind of reservoir of tools and strategies and self-confidence, that they can handle it, and not fall apart and not know where to start because they've done it before. It's not going to be easy, but I can do it again.
Yeah. So I'm hearing that it helps build more resilience, children and
Definitely.
young adults too
Yeah,
as well.
and the wonderful research on resilience, and it's so hopeful, is that for kids who had faced stress or trauma in early childhood, and when they did the study on who emerged the most resilient, the single most important factor was the presence of at least one stable, caring adult in their life. That could be a parent, could be a coach, but the kids who thrived, the kids who were resilient, had somebody who was stable and consistent and showing care. And I feel like every time you feel like, I'm not being a great parent, just remember, if you're showing up for your kid, if you're there, if you're cheering them on, even if you are yelling at them sometimes and are losing it, because we all do, that is the single greatest indicator of long-term resilience.
That makes a lot of sense for sure. Great. I think final question here before we close things up, and I do really appreciate the time. What else should parents or and caregivers be keeping in mind as they see these transitions approaching these kind of major transition points? And I guess to back up just a tiny bit, I mean, like, where are these biggest transition points for kids in their lives? So I think we talked earlier, kindergarten, getting into kindergarten, then first grade, and then high school or middle school. Kind of what are these big break points, and how can parents start preparing even from when their kids are just little itty bitty?
I think you're growing with your kids. So you're going to learn along the way with them. And so, there's some people say it's the terrible twos, some people say it's the three-nagers. Different kids hit it differently, but
Hmm.
you're going to see big shifts all the way up through five because every year is like a lifetime. Fourth grade is also a big time for develop for cognitive leaps and for friendship changes. Middle school, I love middle schoolers. It is absolute bonkers time for change because I mean, sixth graders and eighth graders are not the same people. And it's beautiful, but it's going to try you, and that's okay. Get your people. Don't be scared of it. They're the funniest kids on earth, these middle schoolers. Make sure that they have hobbies that they love. And then of course we're trying to get them to be able to be adults who are on their own. And so what we're aiming for eventually is that they have the confidence and the skills that they can go off, whether they're going to college or trade school or learning, becoming apprentice, that whatever they're doing after high school, that they're finding their way because we help do this for them along the way. We mentored them and help get them there. And then we'll do a lot of this and say, some of those years were a real struggle, but that's what our aim is that we're raising kind, honest, decent, caring, responsible adults because that's what the world needs.
Yeah, absolutely. On that last point, to get them kind of out of the house, whether it's college or a job, any kind of final tips for parents who might be getting ready to make that, their kids are maybe getting ready to go off to college here, they're going to start a new semester or starting a new job, they're going to be out of the house for long periods of time. Any final kind of tips for those parents that they can pass on to those children?
I think one thing is when they're juniors, there's no such thing as a perfect college. There's no
Yeah.
such thing as a perfect path. That I'm really glad to see like community college re-emerging as such an awesome option. As long as they can advocate for themselves and find mentors, you can go anywhere and get an amazing education. And they may say, maybe that's not for me, and maybe I want to go study to be an electrician, and that's incredible, and that is work that is valid and needs to be done. And so I think part of it is not imposing a path, but supporting and getting them thinking, like we want them thinking to do something, but to really allow them to see that there's not one lockstep path. It's not Harvard or bust, right? Like that's not a healthy way to be thinking about the future. It's that there's so many paths to a fulfilling life. And so part you want to do is think about good work and relationships. And if you have kids who have learned some skills about hard work and forming good relationships, that's going to take them really far. And you've got to trust that, and don't buy into the college hype that if you go here, your life is made, because there's
Yeah.
research, it's not true.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. Wonderful. Well, Deborah, it's been a pleasure getting to know you here and chatting with you a little more. And anything else you'd like to say for the viewers and listeners here before we let you go on this topic? And we really appreciate the chance to talk with you.
Oh, I just quote Fred Rogers again, who said, anyone who helps a child's a hero to me. And I believe that this is how we change the world, is by loving kids. And so everyone listening, the fact that you're actually listening to this, kudos, you're making the world a better place.
And made it to the end of this too, as well. Great. Well, Deborah, a pleasure getting to know you a little bit here and talking to you. Thank you again for the time.
Thank you so much.
And to all our viewers and listeners, thank you for stopping in and making us part of your day. Hope you have a great rest of it. Thank you.
Thank you.